Let's talk a little bit about spatial interaction before we get to diffusion. This is a relatively short piece. Okay. Spatial interaction. I've mentioned it before. Yesterday, I mentioned spatial interaction is it's kind of a fancy word for what geographers mean by anything where people in two places have developed a relationship. That's a very general way of putting it. Places are connected. Places have relationships with one another. Now, not like our personal relationships. So we'll get to know each other a little bit during this 4 weeks. I won't. You'll write an essay that will be short, and you'll tell me a little bit about your career plans and maybe your travel experiences, and your likes and dislikes, and that sort of thing. And I like that because I kind of get to know you a little bit, but I don't interrogate you, and you don't have to tell me everything you don't want me to know about you. Okay? So in a sense, you just have the opportunity to tell me what you want me to know about you, okay? And that's all really I want to know about you, is what you want me to know about you, okay? So, but we'll develop this relationship over the course, and it's a student-instructor relationship. So, hopefully you'll have a good experience in the class, and then after the class, when I see you around campus, you'll wave or you'll say, "Hey, how's it going?" And I'll recognize your face. And I'll have a good memory of you being in class and making an edit. Right? Now, spatial interaction can involve interactions between people of any type. Generally, spatial interaction refers to an economic trade relationship of some sort. And we'll talk a little bit more specifically about that when we get into economic geography. We'll talk about things like intervening opportunities, and the complementarity of relationships between places. But just as a very basic idea, we have something called Tobler's first law of geography, or at least the first law of geography, according to Waldo Tobler. Right? Now, Tobler's first law of geography is the idea that places are related. Okay? However, in geography, we're always interested and concerned about variations in things. We understand that the world is not evenly distributed. Nothing is evenly distributed on the planet. And so the idea that things cluster and things disperse and things are found here but they're never found here, those are the sorts of questions that intrigue us as geographers. Okay? But there is one thing that unifies everything on the planet, and that is location. Everything has a location. Okay? Now, has anybody had the great fortune of taking Statistics 2013 yet? Okay, well, probably we'll have to take it. How about Statistics 4013? All right. Well, if you take elementary statistics, or if you've had probability in high school and other, maybe you've had statistics in high school. If you're trying to do, if you're interested in probability, right? You're trying to have an idea of probability. There is one thing that is very crucial that has to be in place with regard to your data. Right? You remember what that would be? The sample has to be random. Right? It has to be random, randomly selected. when you get to statistics, you'll learn about things called the random number table, which allows you to do a random sample of whatever it is you're trying to understand. But probability requires random samples. And that means that when you do spatial statistics, there is an extra problem. Spatial statistics can never be truly random because every place has what? A location. Every place has a location. And that location is specific. In fact, our location right now on the surface of the Earth, yours and mine, is actually very specific. It can be very specific. We know that because we have these supercomputers in our pockets, that are like 100 times, maybe 1,000 times more sophisticated than what they used to get the guy to the moon 50 years ago. But we have these supercomputers in our pockets that have GPS capabilities. So perhaps you have a parent that knows exactly where you are right now, right? Or maybe your friends know exactly where you are right now, right? Because of your Find My Friends, that was called. Anyway, all places have a location, and that location can't be changed necessarily. So that gives us a problem in geography and doing analytical methods in geography. The problem is referred to as spatial autocorrelation. In other words, there's always going to be a certain relationship between places only because of location. Right? So everything is related to everything else, but near things are more related than distant things. That's what Waldo Tobler was saying in his first law of geography. Everything has a location, everything is thus related, and those things that are closer to one another are more related than those things that are far away from others. And so distance has a very strong bearing on activity. Distance decay is another facet of spatial interaction, and it comes to us from something referred to as the gravity model, and we don't have to worry about what that means yet. You'll see it when we get into agriculture and to industrial location. But the distance decay is just the idea that things tend to dissolve or they tend to dissipate as time moves on and as one gets away from an event or a place. So the level of spatial interaction between any two places is inversely proportional to the distance between them. In other words, it's more likely that you're going to have, it's more likely that you're going to find your soulmate, your life partner, your husband or wife in Oklahoma. Okay? Simply because you're in Oklahoma. And chances are that all of your friends are probably also going to marry people or share their lives with people who are from a reasonably nearby place. Probably not outer Mongolia or somewhere that's over 1,000 miles away. And of course, the world has changed a lot in the last 40 or 50 years, so that there is a lot more scrambling of populations and migration that takes place. And we do have more international relationships. My next door neighbor, for example. My next door neighbor is a guy who grew up just south of the Arctic Circle in Sweden. Great guy. Retired agronomy professor. And his wife was born in Taiwan. And she and Bjorn, both of them met when they were in college at University of California, Berkeley. So they met in San Francisco. So, and they wound up in Stillwater. So it's an interesting, interesting chance that, that somebody from the Arctic Circle in Sweden would meet somebody from, tropical maritime Asia, and they would wind up having a family and living in the middle of North America, right? So it's an interesting coincidence, perhaps, but more than likely, most of us will wind up meeting people and living and sharing our lives with people who are nearby. Okay. All right. So spatial interaction, distance decay. Another way of looking at this is, you know how we all have our little crises that happen, family crises, arguments between family members, that sort of thing. Everybody has these issues. Nobody's immune from that. Once you're married, if you get married, then you'll discover what in-laws are. Okay, and there are all sorts of weird things that happen like this. But what I'm trying to get at is you have these little squabbles. Maybe you have a squabble with your sibling or something, and one nice thing is that if you've been around a while, you realize that these things will pass. These things go away. These things get settled eventually, and it's not something to worry too much about. So, distance decay, distance in time, distance in space, these things tend to dissipate. They'll resolve themselves. There's no reason to get too upset. So, that's one way of looking at this idea: distance in space versus distance in time. Okay, so I'm trying to continue on here. And in geography, and particularly in my field, historical geography is much about this concept that we call time-space convergence. Oh, that sounds cool, doesn't it? 2001, A Space Odyssey. Time-space convergence. There is something that you'll often hear of the term time-space. Right? We often refer to distance in time rather than distance. How far away is Oklahoma City? About an hour. How far is Norman? It's about an hour and 20 minutes, something like that. So time-space is the idea that you judge distance by time, or maybe judge, we don't judge time by distance very often. Anyway, over the centuries, over the millennia, the ability for us to move and to move across space, and the tendency for us to travel, beyond our home has greatly increased, obviously. And this is largely a matter of technological changes, right? So it's a process. Time-space convergence is this process by which technology makes distance or distant places converge in terms of transport and communication time. I was born in the mid-1960s, and when I was born, they had cars, they had telephones, even had television, not color television in many places, but there are things that have changed. When I was a kid, I remember we had 4 television stations. That's it. Before about 1980, 4 television stations, and I grew up out in the country, so there was no chance of ever getting cable. And there was no satellite television yet. But we had ABC, NBC, CBS, and PBS, public broadcasting, Channel 13. That was it, okay? And if you wanted to watch something different, you had to get up and go crank the channel changer on the television. Okay? And there really wasn't that much to watch. What are some consequences of that? The consequences are popular culture had some pretty standardized patterns. If you asked your parents about a specific episode of the Brady Bunch, they could probably tell you about it. I can't even tell you a third or a quarter of the names of the television shows that are available to you now. I don't even recognize half of them. I can't tell you who the celebrities are because it's far too complicated anymore. When we had 3 television channels, things were a lot simpler, and people all got the same message for the most part. Good to go? All right, so finishing up with spatial interaction. You've heard of this term globalization, right? The idea, and you have an entire chapter on globalization. What globalization has referred to is both the interaction that takes place beyond, or sort of beyond individual nation states, and the effects of interaction of people beyond nation states. So globalization is it's a complex term, but it's not anything really new. And your textbook author makes the explanation that globalization has been going on for a very long time. It didn't change anything overnight necessarily. But what we do see is that there's sort of a weakening, perhaps, of people's allegiances to country and to home. There are those who have less and less connections to place. So there are a lot of very geographical connotations to the effects of globalization. So I hope you read about those things. One of the major innovations in globalization, the creation of the global economy, has been in things like shipping innovations. And it may not seem that groundbreaking or earth-shattering, but this particular method of shipment, the shipping container, which has pretty much standardized the movement of goods, this has really allowed the United States to enjoy really, really cheap manufactured goods from China and other Asian countries. And it's allowed China to develop and thrive over the last 20, 30 years in a way that nobody really anticipated. When I was a student, I was an undergraduate student 35 years ago here at OSU. We were still talking about how China was going to overcome its population dilemma, how it was going to avoid a Malthusian disaster. Talk more about that when we get to population, but there were still recent memories of famines in China in the 1980s. And in 1984, when I was a student, I learned about the one-child policy, which was being implemented in China just within the first few years of it. And it was horrible. We heard about these awful things taking place. And now the one-child policy has been ditched. And and the Chinese government are actually beginning to worry about China's slow growth, maybe even aging population in the future. And the Chinese have become rich. Not everybody in China, but certainly a large proportion of China has become middle class. And they're going to continue to become middle class for the next century or so. And a lot of that is due to the ability for spatial interaction to take place. For things that used to be shipped in bags and had to be carried by by dock workers onto and off of ships, now are loaded in these Lego-like massive shipping containers that can be moved very, very rapidly on and off ships. And just that increase in the efficiency of moving goods from one type of transportation to another type of transportation, whether it's by rail or by truck, this shipping container has greatly speeded up the ability for places to trade and to interact. And the result, of course, is cheaper goods for everybody and wealth creation. Here's another older map of, and it's not really a map. If you look at it closely, it's more of a diagram. It's what we might call a cartogram. It's an intentionally distorted map. And what this shows you is the time, space, distance, or the time distance in traveling from this point here at London. And the point doesn't really matter. It's just showing you, and this you can see this is from a publication from 1981. So, there are going to be different ways, different modes of travel, right? If you wanted to go to Melbourne, Australia today, could you do that? You could, couldn't you? Isn't that insane? That is just totally crazy. You could go right now, you could get online, you could buy a ticket, you could probably get a seat on the 2 o'clock flight out of Stillwater. I know it because I live right by the airport. You could get out of here, you could go to Dallas-Fort Worth, you could probably be on there. It's going to cost you a little bit, but you could do it. If you had $2,000 or $3,000 to blow a day, maybe it's more than that. But you could get on an international flight and be in Melbourne, Australia. And even though it may only take you 24 hours and all the transit, right? Because you're going to Melbourne, Australia, it's actually going to look like you lost 2 days, but you only lost 1. But isn't that just crazy that you can do that if you really want to? Now, of course, the vast majority of human beings could never do that because they couldn't afford it. And I couldn't either, and probably none of you all could either, but it's possible, right? It's a possibility. Now think about those modes of travel. So spatial interaction here, think about those modes of travel. If you were going to go from London to Bristol or from London to Newcastle up here in the north of England, how are you going to get there? Well, you could take a bike, you could walk, maybe take a train. Probably the most efficient way is to take a train, maybe by car, maybe you could drive. But if you were to go to Newcastle, it's going to take you about a little over 4 hours to drive. Right? And England's a small, the island of Great Britain is not very big, but compared to what we're used to in the United States. How many of you? What's the farthest any of you have ever driven in like one shot without stopping and sleeping? 15 hours. 15 hours. That's about it for me too. I used to live in Knoxville, Tennessee, and we would come back for holidays and stuff, and we would 14-hour trip, and that was not a lot of fun. I'm glad I'm not doing that anymore, but that's enough. That's really enough. I mean, I really, probably should have. We would fly, but we usually didn't have enough money. Anyway, if you're driving up here, it'll take you that many hours. So if you're wanting to get to New York, of course, you're not going to. The way that you're going to get there is by flying. So if you're going to go from London to New York, you can see the flight's about 9 hours, something like that. So if you're flying into any European cities, you can see it's going to be a little bit closer. Basically, this is the idea of time distance, that things get shorter for us. Is it possible for us to compress the world into smaller so that we can get somewhere even faster? What do you think? Trying to be still. Is there going to be another transportation innovation that's going to allow us to move faster than, say, 550 miles per hour in the lower part of the stratosphere. I mean, we already can, right? My dad, one of his proudest moments was he got to fly back in, this is like the early 80s or late 70s. He got to fly on the Concorde, the supersonic passenger jet. He flew from New York City to Paris, or maybe it was London, in like 3 hours. Okay, and that was like a big thrill for him. But that was the that's really fast. And of course now I guess there are ideas of new types of transportation that would launch you into space, right? And then you can come back down real quickly somewhere else. Anyway, yeah, more than likely we're going to have ways of traveling. Of course, now we've got this, the ability to communicate between places instantaneously for next to nothing in terms of price. So it kind of defeats the purpose of actually having to go somewhere, or the requirement of having to go somewhere, right? So maybe not as fun as actually going there, but yeah, now you can communicate with people all over the world. This is a diagram that shows sort of, this time distance of travel, say between, prior to the high-speed railroads in mid-1800s. When you traveled, you went by ship or you went by, horse or foot or something like that. Compare it to the jet age. Sorry. Compared to the jet age, and basically the world has shrunk down to something like this in terms of travel time. Not the greatest. Okay, I got that one. I got that last one out of the textbook. This was one of my discoveries. I photograph a map, so having a smartphone is just murder for me because I run across stuff all the time in the landscape. I want to take a picture of it. I see maps somewhere. I'll take a picture of it, and that's great. Sometimes you have to see all this stuff. But I was at Staples, or maybe it was Office Depot, or one of those places, mailing something for my wife, probably a pair of shoes or something like that, back to Zappos. And so I'm dropping this off, and I'm waiting for somebody to help me. Looking at the counter, and you can kind of see there's some plastic over this. And I thought, oh, cool, all right, so this is the UPS ground map, and what they're showing us is, okay, if you're shipping this from here, then you can get a one-day delivery by UPS ground anywhere in these places. So I could send it to Fort Smith, I could send it to, Gainesville or someplace, Wichita. I could even get it to Kenton, Oklahoma, by UPS ground one day. But look at this. It's there's another tier, and this is the 2-day, and then this is the 3-day, right? And then the red is the 4-day, and then UPS ground to Puerto Rico sounds kind of odd, doesn't it? Or maybe to Hawaii, UPS ground to Hawaii. It's going to get wet. But that's five full days. And UPS ground's the cheap way of sending it, right? So, of course, if you had this map, what if you were in Mississippi? They're not going to have the same map, right? So this is the distance, So, of course, if you go online, you can find the map. And here's the map for. Tell me where you would find this map. Minneapolis. Yeah, exactly. So right here. Charlotte? Yeah, probably Charlotte. Good. But look at the pattern. Sometimes these patterns are really odd. Sometimes they make sense, sometimes they don't. Okay, well, this is kind of a giveaway. Denver. What's wrong with Northern California? Okay. Seattle or maybe Portland, something like that. Okay, so spatial interaction, time, distance. And here's maybe Jackson, Mississippi. I'm not sure what it is. But, all right. So that's spatial interaction, just a little quick